"Sir, with all due respect, this gate is for authorized personnel and ceremonial processions only. Is there something I can help you with?" The words were polite, but the tone was as sharp and sterile as the white marble headstones that stretched for miles behind him. Corporal Davis of the Army's 3rd Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard, stood with a ramrod-straight posture that seemed to defy the humid DC air. His uniform was immaculate, a portrait of military perfection. He looked at the old man before him not as a person but as a problem to be solved, an irregularity to be smoothed over. Robert Ellison, 87 years old, remained silent for a moment, his hands resting on the worn handlebars of his vintage motorcycle. The engine ticked softly as it cooled, the only sound breaking the tense quiet at the McClellan gate. His eyes, the color of a faded sky, weren't focused on the young imperious guard, but on something far beyond, something only he could see. He looked less like a threat and more like a relic from a forgotten time, with a face mapped by wrinkles that told stories the young corporal could never imagine. "I'm here to see a friend," Robert said finally, his voice a low, gravelly hum weathered by time and memory. Corporal Davis's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He was a sentinel, a guardian of this hallowed ground. His duty was to maintain order, to protect the sanctity of the final resting place of heroes. This man on his rumbling non-regulation vehicle, wearing a faded leather jacket and worn denim, did not fit into any of the neat categories of people allowed through this specific historically significant gate. He was an anomaly. "The public entrance is a quarter-mile down Memorial Drive, sir. There is ample parking, and the Welcome Center can provide you with a map to locate the gravesite you wish to visit." Davis recited the information with the practiced, dispassionate cadence of someone who had said it 1,000 times. He gestured vaguely down the road with a gloved hand, a clear dismissal. A small crowd of tourists had begun to gather at a respectful distance, their cameras and hushed whispers creating a low hum of background noise. They were drawn to the quiet drama unfolding, the clash of unyielding military protocol, and the stubborn stillness of an old man who seemed rooted to the spot. Robert didn't move. He didn't even glance in the direction the guard had indicated. "I was told to come to this gate," he stated, not with argument, but with a simple, unwavering certainty. "He's expecting me." The absurdity of the statement, a long-dead soldier expecting a visitor, seemed to break through the corporal's professional veneer. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. "Sir, no one is expecting you. This is Arlington National Cemetery. I need you to move your vehicle and proceed to the public entrance, or I will have to ask you to leave the premises entirely." Robert's gaze finally shifted from the horizon and settled on the young man. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound and weary patience. He slowly reached into his jacket, his movements careful and deliberate. For a second, a younger, more nervous guard standing a few feet away, a private first class named Miller, tensed up. But Robert only produced a worn leather wallet, its folds softened by decades of use. He extracted an old military ID, the photograph a ghost of a young man with sharp eyes and a defiant set to his jaw. He handed it to Davis. The corporal took it, his gloved fingers barely touching the laminated card. He glanced at it, then back at the old man. "Robert Ellison, your active duty status expired in 1975, Mr. Ellison. This doesn't grant you access here. Do you have any other form of identification? A driver's license? Registration for this vehicle?" The demand was sharp, an accusation veiled as a request. As Robert began to retrieve his license, Davis's eyes fell upon a small, crudely sewn patch on the shoulder of the old leather jacket. It was a faded gray depicting a barely discernible specter holding a lit torch. It was unlike any unit insignia he had ever seen in his training manuals. It looked unofficial, almost like something from a motorcycle club. "What is that patch supposed to be?" Davis asked, his voice laced with a new layer of suspicion. "Some kind of club insignia. You know that gang paraphernalia is not permitted on federal grounds." The insult, so casual and yet so deep, hung in the heavy air. Robert's hand, which had been reaching for his wallet, again paused. His calm exterior remained, but a shadow passed through his eyes, a flicker of a pain that went far deeper than the young guard's petty insults. He didn't answer. He simply stared at the corporal, his silence a more powerful response than any words could have been. This silent defiance was more than Corporal Davis could tolerate. His authority in front of his subordinate and a growing number of onlookers was being challenged. He felt the need to reassert control, to put this old man in his place. "Look, old-timer," Davis said, his voice dropping into a condescending drawl, "I am a Tomb Guard Sentinel. We are entrusted with the care of this nation's most honored dead. We take our duty with the utmost seriousness. We don't have time for confused old men playing games or trying to relive some long-gone fantasy. Now, for the last time, Move your motorcycle." In the crowd, a young woman named Sarah Jenkins stood next to her father, a retired Army Master Sergeant. Her father shook his head slowly, a grim look on his face. "That kid is crossing a line," he murmured, his voice tight with anger. "He has no idea. You can see it in the old man's eyes. He's not being difficult, he's just waiting." Robert's hand fell away from his jacket. His gaze drifted back towards the green hills of Arlington. He seemed to be listening to something far away, a distant echo. The faded patch on his shoulder seemed for a moment to catch the light in a peculiar way. The heat shimmered off the asphalt, and for a split second the image in front of Robert blurred. The crisp uniform of the guard, the stern face, the manicured lawns of Arlington, they all dissolved. He was no longer in the oppressive heat of a Virginia summer, but in the biting, soul-deep cold of a Korean winter. The air was thick not with humidity but with the smell of cordite and frozen earth. He saw the face of another young man, barely 20. His face smeared with grime and fear, pressing a similar patch into his hand. It wasn't clean and new, but stiff with frozen mud and something darker. "Welcome to the ghosts, Ellison," the young man had rasped, his breath pluming in the frigid air. "We don't officially exist, we just get the job done. This patch, this means you never walk alone, even when you're the only one left." The sound of distant artillery rumbled, blending with the modern-day sound of a tour bus passing on the street behind him. The vision evaporated, leaving only the quiet dignity of a promise made in a different lifetime. Sarah watched the scene, her stomach twisting into a knot of second-hand humiliation for the old veteran. Her father's words echoed in her ears. This was wrong, utterly wrong. Her father, a man who understood the nuances of military respect better than anyone she knew, looked genuinely pained. He had taught her that honor wasn't about the crispness of a uniform, but the weight of the service carried in a person's soul. She saw Corporal Davis step closer to Robert, his hand moving casually, almost theatrically towards his sidearm holster. It wasn't a direct threat, but an unmistakable act of intimidation. That was the final straw. "Dad, I can't just stand here," she whispered, her voice urgent. Her father nodded, his eyes still locked on the confrontation. "Protocol is protocol, but respect is a higher law. That guard is a disgrace to the uniform." Sarah fumbled for her phone. She wasn't going to just record this. During a college internship at the Pentagon, she had been given a contact number in the Public Affairs Office, a general line for what her supervisor had called unforeseen inter-service snafus. She had never imagined she would use it. She stepped away from the crowd, finding a sliver of shade beneath an old oak tree. Her fingers trembled slightly as she dialed. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Public Affairs, Sergeant Miller speaking." "Hello, Sergeant," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm a civilian calling from Arlington National Cemetery. I'm at the McClellan Gate." "Ma'am, if this is a general inquiry, you should call the Arlington Visitors Line." "No, this isn't a general inquiry," Sarah cut in, her tone sharpening with urgency. "There's an incident here. A sentinel from the 3rd Infantry, a Corporal Davis, is refusing entry to an elderly veteran. He's being incredibly disrespectful. He's threatening to detain him." There was a pause on the other end, followed by the faint sound of typing. "Ma'am, the sentinels at the gate have specific orders. I'm sure the corporal is just following procedure." "His name is Robert Ellison," Sarah said, speaking the name she had overheard clearly and deliberately into the phone. The veteran's name, Robert Ellison. The typing stopped. The silence on the other end of the line was suddenly heavy, absolute. Sarah could hear a muffled sound, as if the sergeant had covered the receiver with his hand to speak to someone else. When he came back on the line, the professional detachment in his voice was gone, replaced by a strained, high-tension wire of pure alarm. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now several octaves higher, "can you spell that last name for me?" "Ellison," she said. "First name Robert. And you are at the McClellan Gate? Right now?" "Yes, right now. The corporal is about to call the MPs. Ma'am, stay on the line. Do not hang up. And whatever you do, try to keep the situation from escalating further. Help is on the way." The line didn't go dead, but she could hear a flurry of panicked activity in the background, voices shouting, chairs scraping across a floor. The cavalry, it seemed, had been called. Inside a sterile, brightly lit office deep within the Pentagon, Sergeant Miller felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. He stared at the screen in front of him, at the file that had flashed red with a security level he had never seen before. The name Robert Ellison was linked to a string of designations that made his blood run cold. CHOS, Inchon, Task Force Ghost. The file was mostly redacted, black lines obscuring entire paragraphs, but what was visible was enough. He shot out of his chair so fast it slammed into the cubicle wall behind him. He didn't bother to knock as he burst into the office of his superior, a Navy captain named Wallace. "Sir, you have to see this, right now." Captain Wallace looked up from a stack of reports, his face a mask of annoyance at the interruption. "What is it, Sergeant? This had better be important." Miller didn't speak. He just placed his laptop on the captain's desk, the screen glowing with Ellison's file. Wallace's eyes scanned the first few lines. His annoyance melted away, replaced by stunned disbelief, which then morphed into a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. His face went pale. "My God," Wallace breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He looked up at Miller, his eyes wide. "Get me Rear Admiral Hayes. He's en route to Arlington for the wreath-laying ceremony. His convoy should be less than 10 minutes out. Use the priority channel. Tell his aide the package is ghost. Say it exactly like that. Go, now." Back at the gate, Corporal Davis was reaching the end of his patience. The old man's silent refusal to be dismissed felt like a personal affront. The growing crowd, their phones all pointed at him, made him feel like an animal in a zoo. He had to end this. He had to re-establish the order that had been so thoroughly disrupted. He took a deep, steadying breath and stepped forward until he was standing uncomfortably close to Robert. "That's it," he said, his voice cold and final. "You are creating a public disturbance and refusing to obey the lawful order of a member of the United States Armed Forces. I am detaining you for the military police. Put your hands on the handlebars where I can see them." He reached for his radio to call it in. He added with a final twist of the knife, "We'll get you a nice quiet room to sit in while we sort this out. Maybe a medical evaluation to make sure you're all there." Robert Ellison simply looked at him, and for the first time a flicker of something close to pity appeared in his eyes. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod, as if accepting a fate he had long ago learned not to fight. It was then that the sound pierced the air. It wasn't the familiar wail of a local police siren, but the low, urgent, and deeply authoritative whoop of a military police escort. 2 black motorcycles with flashing lights crested the hill on Memorial Drive, followed by a gleaming black sedan bearing the 2-star flag of a Rear Admiral on its fender. An armed escort vehicle brought up the rear. The convoy didn't slow or turn towards the public lot. It drove directly, unstoppably toward the McClellan Gate. The motorcade screeched to a halt just feet from the confrontation. The tourists gasped, stumbling back to make room. Corporal Davis froze, his hand hovering over his radio, his face a canvas of utter confusion. Before he could even process what was happening, the rear door of the sedan was thrown open. A tall, powerfully built man in his late 50s emerged. His dress-white uniform was blinding in the afternoon sun, his shoulders adorned with the gleaming gold stripes and star of a Rear Admiral. This was Rear Admiral Mark Hayes, a man whose stern gaze could make captains tremble. He didn't so much as glance at Corporal Davis. His eyes, sharp and focused, found Robert Ellison immediately. The Admiral's entire demeanor, which seconds before had been one of stone-faced authority, softened with a wave of something that looked like awe and profound respect. Admiral Hayes strode forward, his footsteps echoing on the pavement. He stopped directly in front of Robert's motorcycle. The crowd held its collective breath. Then, in a movement so sharp and precise it seemed to cut the air, the Admiral snapped to attention. He raised his hand to his brow in the most perfect, heartfelt salute Corporal Davis had ever witnessed. It was not a salute given to a superior officer. It was a salute of pure, unadulterated reverence. "Mr. Ellison," Admiral Hayes's voice boomed, carrying across the stunned silence. "It is an honor, sir. Please forgive us. Forgive this unforgivable delay." He held the salute for a long, poignant moment, his eyes locked on Robert's. Then he slowly lowered his hand and turned his head, his gaze finally falling upon Corporal Davis. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a glacial fury that was terrifying to behold. "Corporal," the Admiral said, his voice dangerously quiet, "do you have any idea who you have been speaking to?" Davis, pale and trembling, could only stammer, "Sir, he had no authorization. I was following protocol, sir." "Protocol," the Admiral repeated the word as if it were a foreign obscenity. He took a step closer to the young guard, his shadow falling over him. "Your protocol does not extend to legends, Corporal. Your protocol does not give you the right to disrespect a founding father of modern special warfare." The Admiral turned his body slightly, addressing not just Davis but everyone within earshot. His voice rose, taking on the commanding tone of a man used to speaking from the bridge of a warship. "You are standing in the presence of Robert Ellison. When the Marines were trapped at the chosen reservoir, surrounded and facing annihilation in temperatures 40 degrees below zero, Lieutenant Ellison and his team of 3 men, a team that would later be known as the Frozen Ghosts, volunteered to go behind 10,000 enemy soldiers to demolish a critical bridge, cutting off their supply line. He was the only one who came back. For that, he was awarded the Navy Cross. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Phones were no longer just recording a confrontation. They were documenting a moment of living history. The Admiral wasn't finished. Years later, during a classified operation in the jungles of Vietnam, his Special Operations Unit was compromised and ambushed. Captain Ellison, as he was then, held off an entire enemy platoon single-handedly to allow for the medical evacuation of his men. He was believed to be killed in action, only to walk out of the jungle 6 weeks later, having survived on his own. For that, he was awarded a second Navy Cross, an action that remained classified until 1998. Admiral Hayes pointed a finger at the faded patch on Robert's jacket. That club patch, Corporal, is the original insignia of Task Force Ghost, the Tier 1 Special Missions unit he founded and commanded. The unit that has been responsible for some of this nation's most critical and dangerous missions for the last 50 years. The men in that unit call him the First Ghost. This man has forgotten more about honor, courage, and commitment than you will ever learn. He doesn't need a gate pass, Corporal. Men like Robert Ellison are the reason this gate exists. The public vindication was absolute. The weight of the Admiral's words settled over the scene, crushing Corporal Davis under their significance. He looked as if he might faint. His face, once a mask of arrogant certainty, was now a crumpled mess of shame and disbelief. Sarah's father, the retired Master Sergeant, had tears openly streaming down his face. He stood at attention, his hand raised in his own salute. The Admiral turned back to Davis, his voice dropping once more to a low, devastating rebuke. You wear the uniform of the old guard. You stand watch over the graves of heroes. Your most sacred duty is to recognize the living heroes who walk among us. Today you not only failed in that duty, you brought shame upon this sacred ground and upon that uniform. You will be relieved of your post, immediately. Before the Admiral could say more, a weathered hand gently touched his arm. It was Robert. Easy, Mark, Robert said, his voice calm and steady. The boy was just doing his job, a little too well maybe, but he was following his orders. Admiral Hayes looked at Robert, his expression softening again. Sir, there is no excuse for. There's always an excuse, Robert interrupted gently, but it's the reason that matters. His reason was to protect this place. He just lost his way a little. He turned his gaze to the mortified Corporal Davis. The uniform doesn't make the man, son. The deeds do. And sometimes the most important deeds are the ones no one ever sees. Remember that. As Robert spoke those words, another image flashed in his mind, quicker this time, a mere fragment of a memory. He was back in the jungle, rain lashing down. A young soldier, a boy from Ohio with his first ever patrol patch on his sleeve, was bleeding out. Robert wasn't a captain or a commander in that moment. He was just a man pressing a field dressing to the wound, shielding the boy's body with his own as bullets tore through the leaves above. He remembered pointing to the boy's patch. This is what matters, he had whispered over the chaos. Getting you home. The deed, not the glory. The man, not the mission. That was the origin of his wisdom. The Admiral nodded slowly, understanding the lesson being offered. He personally waved Robert Ellison through the McClellan Gate. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of awe and reverence. As Robert's motorcycle rumbled past, people began to applaud. A spontaneous, heartfelt ovation that echoed across the quiet hills of Arlington. Robert rode to a quiet section of the cemetery, stopping before a simple white headstone that read, Michael P. Callahan, Sergeant, U.S. Army, Korea. He spent an hour there, alone with his friend, speaking in quiet tones that the wind carried away. The fallout for Corporal Davis was swift, but not as punitive as he might have feared. He was reassigned from ceremonial duties but not discharged. Instead, he, along with every sentinel at Arlington, was mandated to attend a new training program. It became known informally as the Ellison Protocol, a series of history lessons and recognition training sessions designed to help the guards identify and assist older generations of veterans, teaching them to look past the surface to the service that lay beneath. A few months later, a man in simple civilian clothes walked into a small diner in Alexandria. He saw Robert Ellison sitting alone in a booth, slowly stirring a cup of coffee. After a moment of profound hesitation, the young man walked over. Mr. Ellison. Robert looked up. It was the former Corporal Davis. I wanted to apologize, he said, his voice quiet and stripped of all its former arrogance, for my conduct that day. There's no excuse. I was wrong. Robert studied his face for a long moment. He saw not a disgraced guard, but a young man who had learned a hard and valuable lesson. He gestured to the empty seat across from him. Sit down, son. Robert said, a faint smile touching his lips. Tell me about yourself. Robert Ellison's story is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us every day, often in the quietest of forms. If you were moved by his story of valor and humility, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more.